platform for the second edition of Journal Journey. Journal Journey's idea, a very unique kind of academic activity, was first mooted by our most enthusiastic member, Dr. Jay Bhandarkar. And now I hear it has become a trendsetter and many other branches have followed suit. As usual, happy to do something different. The first issue was on 1st July 2021, and since it was a first, we think we had many lacunae. But with the guidance from Dr. Nimen Mohanty sir, hopefully we will fill this. And so here we are, we present our second issue of Journal Journey. And today we are fortunate to have with us well-known academician, Professor N.K. Subramanian as our chief guest. I welcome Professor Subramanian, experts Dr. Pankaj Deshpande and Dr. Nakul Kothari sir, speakers Dr. Abasaheb Patankar, Dr. Parvez Sheikh, Dr. Hemant Gangolia sir. I also welcome Dr. Nimen Mohanty sir, who is Professor Emeritus of MGM College. Then Dr. Chitra Kulkarni, Dr. Wankhede sir, Neha, Dr. Jay Bhandarkar, Dr. Mohite sir, whose birthday is there today, but he is joined. I welcome you all. Let me introduce our chief guest, Professor N.K. Subramanian, the brain behind T20. I got to witness T20 academic session in Mahapadikon 2019 at Amravati, and I must say it was completely amazing. For those who do not know, T20 academics means 20 topics, 4 minutes each, and 80 minutes of academics with 10 minutes of MOC, and total 90-minute session, means action-packed sessions. Each speaker has just 4 minutes to give clear-cut take-home messages and no frills attached, and followed by sirs punchlines in cricket language. It was educative as well as entertaining, I must say. And no wonder it was the most popular session of the conference. So brilliant academician that he is, his field of interest is pulmonology. No wonder he is the chairperson of IIP National Respiratory Chapter. And sir has been executive board member and have held many posts in IIP. He has been a faculty in modules, CME, conferences, orations, awards, books, publications. The list is exhaustive. So we welcome you, sir, once again. And I request you to please give your blessings and say a few words, sir.
Okay, at the outset, Sunita Madam, President of IIP Raigad, let me ask you one simple question. How many minutes I should speak? Is it T20 style or is it?
4 minutes. 4 minutes.
No, I will finish in 1 or 2 minutes.
4 minutes. 4 minutes.
No, even correct me if I am overshooting also. I don't mind because ultimately the academic purpose should be served.
Sir, 4 minutes is yours.
Okay. Dr. Sunita Ingle Madam and Dr. Bhandarkar sir, as the President and Secretaries at the helm of affairs, hearty congratulations for you to take real academics seriously. You know, when somebody takes journal club, it means that they're really serious about academics. As a professor and teacher, let me first congratulate your branch for making this not just, you know, some expert opinions, views, but real-time evidence-based medicine. So if you remember my T20 words, mudde pe aa jao, koi bakwas nahi bolne ka. You know, if you remember, see, that's what we meant. And if somebody has to tell practitioner, please give ORS, he should give why he is telling so, and is there an evidence? Just because it is not easily made. You understand, there has to be some scientific basis. Many times we don't explore them, and journals are the way. Okay, now let me also thank my friend, the true academician in him, Dr. Hemant. I'm sorry, I'll use the first names only so that I feel a little closer, and Mahesh, I don't call him Mohite now, so that, you know, we feel a little closer. And Pankaj and Nakul for being the master blasters today, and all the seniors and teachers. Why a journal is to be read? It's because, is it because the information is erotic and, you know, exciting? See, people read newspapers for different reasons, correct? No, what they read for entertainment. They want to sip a cup of coffee. They really want to see the flow of politics, sports, or they want to get updated. They wanted to know their horoscope. Many people see that page where my zodiac sign is so. So there are different types of people who would see the newspaper, and journal is similar. See, if there is a bunch of 70, 80 pediatricians, each one will look at the journal in different perspectives. So if I were to put myself in editor's perspective, how I can make the journal readable for everyone. So it should be informative, it should be exhaustive. At the same time, it is not too long, too short, and not too complicated a line. And something like 820 members enrolled in a randomized controlled trial, which was double blind conducted, of which 262 people dropped out, and of which 16 were males and 17 were females. All these things doesn't make any sense to some of the pediatricians. So lastly, they go to the last column and see what the study adds. That's all. Isn't it? All of us remember these points. So I would say, Sunita madam and Bhandarkar sir, I will give a talk in Raigad next time. Being a chief guest, I will volunteer for a 15 minutes. I will speak how to read a journal by a practicing pediatrician. This is something which I volunteer. It is not for how to conduct a journal club. This is different. When the journal is posted to you, or when a journal comes to you by post, how and what you should read in that. See, is they should read an abstract, or they should read. See, if you ask me as an academician, the most important part of the journal is the methodology, how they have conducted the study. But if you ask a practitioner, what are the take-home points, isn't it? So that's important. For a researcher, it is something else. What is the research question, PICO question that has been asked? Basically, what is the population that is studied? What is the intervention that they are doing? What is the comparison they are doing? What is the outcome they are seeing? What are the results that are coming out? Is it a systematic review? Is it a review article? Is it a case series? Is it a case report? What is the level of evidence and strength of recommendation? I think at the end of journal club, I would request you, maybe I will volunteer myself for today, that it's about reading. And more than that, it's about interpreting after reading, that you please invite the subject experts. For example, you do a nephrology journal club. I will say that somebody from nephrology be there in the scene, and he will give his comments at the end of the session as to take home points at the end of an exhaustive journal club. It is very easy nowadays in the webinars to get some person who is specialized in a particular field in which you have chosen the journal article. So get those persons. I would go one step ahead and say that if there is an original person who is published that particular article, he can also be available. It's not very difficult to get them. And he will be able to explain what difficulties he faced when even he conducted that trial or that particular study. So these are my inputs as far as the program is concerned as a guest of honor. But let me apprise and tell everyone, although we people play T20, we people speak 2 lines, 3 lines messages, there is a lot of thing that goes behind it, which is not seen. Okay, let me tell you, in a movie, you will see only one song in Lonavala Hindi movie that is short. But do you think only 10 minutes they will shoot? What you see is an output of enormous amount of effort that is put by many academicians. So many faculties who speak on conferences would have put n number of efforts behind. They have to tell 2 lines, but they have to read 2 hours for telling 2 lines. And the concept of T20, because Madam tickled me, was to narrow it further so that the audience just get what they want. So that was about making just a 5-over match. So that is the concept. And I think we should respect the time of the viewers. And I have finished more than 4 or 5 minutes for me. Thank you for inviting, and I'm volunteering. So please tell me the time next time. I will just take one session in the journal club from the practicing pediatrician's point of view, which parts of the journal he should read, which parts of the journal he should pick up, and let me make it as humorous as possible for all of you to, like it as well in my talk. So with these words, let me end my talk. Hope that I'm not putting a pressure on you to invite me, but you find your convenient time. This is what I personally felt, that the practicing pediatrician should know how to read a journal. this is how to conduct a journal club. The pediatrician should know how to read a journal. So this would be the talk which I would be volunteering next time. So thank you very much for inviting me. I will be not muting myself, putting off my video. Let me watch the complete program, how it goes.
Yes.
At the end of it, let me put in the WhatsApp whatever feedbacks that I would feel in order to make Raigad the real Raigad. Thank you very much.
Sir,
Thank you.
it's first of
Thank you
every
so
month,
much.
so it is 1st September for you.
Done.
Thank you so much, sir, for your inputs. Really valuable to us, and definitely we'll have it one session on how to do the journal reading. So now we begin our journal reading. Our experts today are Dr. Pankaj Deshpande, a renowned pediatric nephrologist from Navi Mumbai. Sir is a well-known faculty at state and national level conference. The other expert is Dr. Nakul Kotharis. He's a consultant in critical care and emergency services at SRCC Children's Hospital, Mumbai. And he's done fellowship in perinatal and neonatal medicine from Sydney, and his special interest in point of care ultrasounds in NICU and quality improvement projects in clinical settings. Sir has many publications and chapters in national textbook. So our first speaker today is Dr. Abasai Patankar from Mangaon. He's a leading pediatrician from there. And expert for this session will be Dr. Pankaj Deshpande. Over to Dr. Abasai.
Yeah, just one comment to make, Abasai. Thank you for not inviting the original author. नाहीतर घाबरून पळून जाणार आपण, कारण ओरिजिनल ऑथर आता नसणार कुठे. 1935 आर्टिकल.
Abba, you can start sharing the screen.
या ओरिजिनल ऑथरही नाहीये, आणि ज्या हॉस्पिटलमध्ये त्या ऑथरने स्टडी केला ते हॉस्पिटलही आता नाही.
But it will be very interesting, I'm sure.
दोन्ही ठिकाणचे फोटो मात्र माझ्याकडे मी टाकलेले आहेत. So I'll start sharing this.
By the time Dr. Abbas Sahib starts screen sharing, we acknowledge the presence of Dr. Dhananjay Shah from Gujarat. Dr. Sham also from Thane, I think so. He's there. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Dr. Gangolia, sir?
Yes.
Slide is visible?
Yes.
Am I audible properly?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Dear friends, it's a great day to me today. It's a friendship day. We all are friends. Now we have got a friend from Dr. in a form of Dr. Subramaniam. He's the chief guest of our today's Journal Club. Sir, you have given a lot of inputs in a very short time. Really, you are a T20 cracker. Because what I thought what I should present, and you said that it is the perspective of each individual. So when I selected this topic of hematuria and this article of 1935, I also have got some perspective saying regarding this. What was the thought process in that era when things were not available to them, the way the things are available to us, and how they were managing the cases. We have heard our seniors many a times saying that when there used to be a case of tuberculous meningitis and hydrocephalus, and they used to tie the basically head to prevent that sort of a hydrocephalus or to treat that sort of hydrocephalus. And now we know that everybody goes with a shunt. So this is the advancement. So what was happening in the previous era in 1935? As Dr. Pankaj Deshpande has already pointed out, this is a very old type of a paper. But it happened to come to me when I was reading Approach to a Case of Hematuria from Nelson. I thought, okay, let's see what hematuria is there. And I got this paper of a more of an adult type of a paper, more of a surgical perspective to this case, and less of a pediatrics aspect to this. But I thought the clinical is always same, whether it is adult or pediatric. The approach to the patient should be more or less same. There may be certain diseases which may be prevailing more in a adult population, but approach should be same. So I selected this paper and I conveyed to Dr. Mohanty sir. He gracefully accepted this. At the outset, let me thank Dr. Sunita Ingle Madam, IIP President, Dr. Neelav Bhandarkar for giving the chance. At the same time, I also congratulate and thank Dr. Jay Bhandarkar, Dr. Hemant Gangolia for initiating this great journal journey. I also thank Dr. Mahesh Moite sir, my mentor, and Dr. Mohanty sir, who is actually the coordinator as well as the guiding force behind all this journal club, and all the experts. Today, Dr. Nakul sir is also there. Dr. Pankaj Deshpande sir, my mentor, today is there. whenever I'll be having any difficulty or I want any explanation regarding any point over there, I'll be just going to expert Dr. Pankaj Deshpande sir, and there only we'll clarify the doubts if it is there. In between, if you feel like asking a question, I really don't see the hands over there because I'm staring the screen, but you can put the questions into chat box and Dr. Deshpande sir would look at me. So with this short introduction, I'll start with my presentation. My presentation has got two parts. One part is something which is new, and later on what I have read in the article. So this journal journey, this article is hematuria, which has been written by Dr. J. Swift Jolly. He is a MD. He was MD FRCS. He was a senior surgeon to St. Peterson's Hospital, Forstone in London, and it has been appeared in Postgraduate Medical Journal on 1st June of 1935. This journal is a part of a BMJ, basically British Medical Journal, and I downloaded this article on June of 11, 21. The sir, Dr. J. Swift Jolly, he has put his objective in writing this article. What he has written: to facilitate the diagnosis of the position and the nature of the underlying lesion by describing the various forms of the symptoms of hematuria metric. Means if hematuria is there, he wants to know where the hematuria is occurring from, what is the nature of the disease by which hematuria is causing, is getting the reason of hematuria, and is there any correlation where there are certain symptoms which are particular to some certain conditions, and he tried to correlate that, and then he wrote that paper, Dr. J. Swift Jolly. Before starting, I'll take only 3 to 5 minutes. It's a prelude. Definition of hematuria is generally hematuria is defined as the presence of 5 or more than 5 RBCs per high power field in 3 consecutive centrifuge specimens obtained 1 week apart. This definition has got little bit changes as per the references. Somewhere it has been written 3 to 5 RBCs. Somewhere it has written 2 consecutive samples at weeks apart rather than 3. But what is permanent here is a centrifuge specimen. So when I was basically trying to prepare for this article, basically Journal Club, I asked my pathotechnician whether he does that. I asked him how do you do the RBC count in urine? So he said that we centrifuge it properly and we discard the supernatant and we take the whatever is at the base and then look under the microscope. So I got very much happy that whatever RBC report, urine report I am getting is definitely of a quality report I am getting, or I can depend on that report, or I can interpret that report. So it may be a gross.
Can I also keep on adding?
Yeah, please.
Yes,
sir. Yes, sir.
When you say 5 RBCs, I think the definition now is definitely more than 5 RBCs. So there is no question about that. And secondly, when you say per high power field, it's always a centrifuge sample.
Yes.
Because uncentrifuged will be cubic millimeter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it will be either gross or microscopic. It will be transient or persistent. It will be symptomatic or asymptomatic. It is isolated or associated with proteinuria. It may be glomerular or maybe non-glomerular. It has got a tremendous value in evaluating a case of hematuria. Hematuria it's not a red color that it is hematuria. We all know the red color of a urine, maybe because of so many things which are there in the next slide. Positive test for blood on urine examination is not every time hematuria, because we know methemoglobin, myoglobin, and this hemoglobin also causes positive test. So one has to have RBCs present in the urine and need to be seen under the microscope. Unless and until you have RBCs seen under microscope, the patient cannot be called, their urine sample cannot be labeled as a hematuric sample or RBC positive sample. Even if it is a gross hematuria, still it is better to confirm in the lab. So what are the salient features? Isolated, asymptomatic, microscopic hematuria, which we see in day-to-day practice, is always benign. Sometimes you have to keep watch on it, but most of the times these are the cases where isolated, asymptomatic, microscopic hematuria, mostly they turn out to be benign and they don't require much of an investigation. Only thing is you have to keep the watch on them. Negative dipsticks reliably exclude hematuria because dipsticks, if it is negative, if dipstick is positive, it can be positive for other than RBCs also. So dipstick negative, it is more reliable to exclude hematuria. Strip can detect that dipstick stick can detect up to 5 to 10 RBCs. So it is quite as good as if it is there, it is as good as you are viewing the sample in the microscope. But however it may be, microscopic examination is a gold standard for detection of microscopic hematuria because gross hematuria anybody can see. The red color urine is not hematuria all the time. So it can be because of drugs, we know rifampicin, nitrofurantoin. It may be because of dyes, we know beet and all. And it may be because of methemoglobin also. So dipstick has got false positive and false negative also. So it is better to confirm the dipstick test with microscopic examination of urine. It can be from upper urinary tract or lower.
I think,
Yeah.
Abba, just to mention, I mean, I think this is not part of the article, but it is part of the track module, if Mahesh will remember, that if very often people look at the report which shows occult blood positive and people get worried, not just the pediatricians, but even the parents, because they keep on pointing to that. So occult blood positive does not mean hematuria, because that is often called as pseudo hematuria, because the number of RBCs which is less than 5 is not called microscopic hematuria. The reason why you see that is because of the pseudo peroxidase reaction of heme, which combines with the peroxidase agent in the strip, and therefore it gives it positive. So even if you have 1 or 2 RBCs, that will still be seen because the RBCs lies and the hemoglobin comes out into the urine and it gives a positive reaction. So that is what is called as pseudo microhematuria.
So there has to have a microscopic examination where more than 5 RBCs are seen. Okay, is it right, sir?
Yes.
So generally, when there is a cola color urine, there is a proteinuria, RBC cast, and something suggestive of acute nephritic syndrome like hypertension, edema, oliguria, or something like that. Then in that situation, you have to know whether it is a glomerular hematuria or extraglomerular hematuria. So it is not the point of a discussion today, but one has to have some investigation based on that, which is very well written in NILS. One also should know recurrent gross hematuria can be associated with so many conditions. One also should know hematuria proteinuria is a dangerous condition. It has got so many differentials which are available over there.
So just one caveat to that last slide which you put, hematuria with proteinuria. You always have to be careful when you've got gross hematuria, because when you do a protein test by the strip, the protein will always be positive when you've got gross hematuria, because you're picking up blood from the protein from the blood. So when the urine clears up, that is the time to measure the protein in the urine, because otherwise every child who presents with gross hematuria will always have some proteinuria.
Sir, is there any like a measurement of a protein more than 100, less than 100 or something like that?
No, that dipstick will tell you, but it has to be a clear sample.
Okay.
In gross hematuria, the blood which is coming out itself will give the protein to be positive. But so that's why urine has to be cleared up. Otherwise, you'll have to do a 24-hour urine protein.
Okay. But in that case, the proteinuria, protein will be.
No, correct me if I'm wrong. I think if there is a blood contamination, the proteins will not be more than 2+. That
is always the textbook teaching. It's not entirely true, because if you go to the urine protein creatinine ratio, that will be very high.
Very high.
Even in post-infectious nephritis, you will often find that the proteinuria is of the range of more than 2, which is nephrotic range. Whereas it may not actually be so, because it's just gross hematuria that is causing the proteinuria. So when
but most of the textbooks mention 2+, no?
Yes, that 2+ is an error which we talked about in the track module, which is the problem. Yeah.
So this is a take-home message from my first part of our presentation. Asymptomatic patients with isolated microscopic hematuria should not undergo extensive diagnostic evaluation, because such hematuria is often benign and transient. And good clinical history, examination, knowledge of age-wise occurrence of the renal disease is of great help to evaluate and diagnose a case of hematuria. So this is the article.
I think there is just a little. I'm sorry, keep on interrupting.
No, sir, that's the reason we are there.
So the point is, isolated microscopic hematuria, if it comes only once, may not be a problem. But if it is persistent, Because when you are saying 3 samples that you have got, it is
Yeah.
persistent microscopic hematuria. That is the whole idea of trying
Right.
to pick them up.
Right.
Now, asymptomatic persistent microscopic hematuria has got many differentials. Unfortunately, none of them which come from the kidney are benign. If you look at IgA nephropathy, 30% will have kidney failure in the next 10 years. 30% will have kidney failure in 20, 30 years. 30% remain fine throughout life. MPGN will have kidney failure, 50% will have kidney failure in the next 10, 15 years. Thin basement membrane is probably benign, where 90, 95% remain 5%. So the spectrum is so large that to call it completely benign is a problem. So the only thing we can say is it doesn't cause immediate problems, but these children need long-term follow-up. There is no other way of looking at them.
Is there any number of RBCs? Is there any number? बोल प्रमोद.
मला पंकज सरांना एक प्रश्न विचारत आहे सर. How do you find how common IgA nephropathy? How do you find how it is common in your practice? IgA nephropathy. And should we screen in masses for IgA nephropathy?
No, there are 2 points to it. The first is it is the commonest cause of kidney failure all over the world, including India. So that's one. The second thing is just because what I said right now, if you look at a child who's got IgA today, so how will you diagnose IgA? It is a biopsy diagnosis. So unless you do a kidney biopsy, you will never be able to diagnose IgA.
But if we are having hematuria with proteinuria, and we are excluding the causes of SPGN, in that case, should we screen for IgA?
No, I'm coming to that, Dr. Wankhede. Just let me finish this. Because if I do a biopsy today in a child who's got microscopic hematuria and who's got IgA, what am I going to do that is different? Nothing. Because as I said, 30% will lead a perfectly normal life without ever developing kidney problems or proteinuria. Whereas
without steroid?
Without anything. Whereas 30% will get kidney failure in the next 10 years. And who are these 30%? Those who start developing proteinuria. So unless they start having proteinuria, your intervention in the form of a kidney biopsy is probably not warranted anyway. So only microscopic hematuria, you will not go around biopsying them. But if you monitor them and they start developing proteinuria, then you will definitely need to biopsy them because you will be able to offer treatment to them. And then over a long-term period, you may be able to retard the progression of kidney disease. So screening, only picking up microscopic hematuria is going to be more scary rather than doing any benefit because we are not going to biopsy every child. So I think picking up proteinuria might be a better option rather than looking at only hematuria. On the contrary, in a country like Japan, they would screen for microscopic hematuria because IgA is extremely high. So there they follow these children up very closely and therefore mass screening makes more sense there.
Sir, what could be the reason for IgA nephropathy is more common in Japan particularly? Is there any predisposing factors?
I don't think they have specifically said what causes it. It may be the HLA types that they have. They have not specifically said why it happens more so.
Sorry to disturb.
Just a thought from me from the same queue. Permit me for a line. And Dr. Pankaj, you can correct me also. In a child with no known etiology of proteinuria, if it starts developing hematuria, it is worsening. And on the corollary, if a child with known etiology of hematuria, if it starts developing proteinuria, again it is worsening. So that means addition of any symptom from the pre-existing symptom can be taken as a progressive disease. Whatever could be the etiology, but given some exceptions. Okay, I do understand. Too much of generalization would be difficult, but at least any addition of one of the finding could be a disease progression.
No, I think the statement is if you have got hematuria and proteinuria develops, it is definitely a bad sign. Persistent proteinuria. The other way around may not matter to that extent because you will have already investigated the proteinuria. You don't leave proteinuria for a long time because that is what kills the kidney. Hematuria will never kill the kidney.
Okay, just one quick question. IgA nephropathy to me was a recurrent gross hematuria rather than microscopic. Am I right?
No, it can be anything. They can present only with microscopic hematuria. They can have recurrent gross hematuria also. So the recurrent gross hematuria, there may be one episode today, 5 years later. So it doesn't have to be recurrent every couple of weeks or every couple of months. There can be isolated episodes over many years.
Sir, can we have a demarcation, right? Which are the patients who needs to be extensively investigated in microscopic hematuria? It is a number of RBCs or general
Proteinuria with hematuria.
No, so if you have a child, आता इथेच संपलं तर पुढे आपण काय बोलणार जर्नल बद्दल म्हणून मी बोललो नव्हतो.
नाही, चालेल ना.
No, because if a child presents with hematuria, shall I ते संपून जाईल म्हणून मी बोलत नाही.
नाही नाही, काय प्रॉब्लेम.
If a child,
You can continue.
Ultimate purpose is to learn. The ultimate
if a
purpose-
child presents with hematuria,
एक मिनिट. Hey, one minute. Abba,
Level 3,
एक
C4.
minute. Just Pramod.
Nephropathy. Will it help
Pramod,
us to
Pramod.
diagnose? Yes, sir.
Hey, Pramod,
sir.
please. Let us conduct in a formal way. Let Abba complete his presentation, and then we'll take Pankaj. You note down the points and take it at the end, because every time
Okay,
you
sir.
take it, it will be
Sorry,
question provoking, thought provoking.
I
So
don't.
let Abba complete his presentation. Then Pankaj will give the review and note down the points, and then we'll take a question answer. Let's go
Yeah.
for that. Otherwise, it's never end.
Otherwise, I don't want to be like somebody else we know. Mahesh, you know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Abba. I think
Yes,
finish
yes,
your
yes.
presentation, then we'll go.
Yes. So this was the article. The first line, if you can read, hematuria is the passing of blood in the urine. It is not a disease, but is a symptom of many diseases. It is like a fever. There is usually no difficulty in diagnosing the presence of blood because it is always visible. But there is often great difficulty determining the site of hemorrhage because it has got a tremendous concern, whether it is coming from the kidney or the ureter or the bladder or maybe urethra. And also the pathological condition giving rise to it, because there are certain conditions which are very common in pediatric population. At the same time, there are certain conditions undoubtedly very much prominent in adult age group or geriatric age group. This paper is more of a geriatric. It is obvious that blood found in the urine may come from one or both kidneys. It is also very important. Or from any part of the urinary passages, ureter, bladder, urethra, etc. And may be due to a variety of causes. Causes may be very simple, benign, or maybe something which is transient to what sir said, may be leading to end-stage kidney disease. And again, I am reading the same line into his actually words. What he said is, my object is to facilitate the diagnosis of the position and nature of underlying lesion by describing the various forms that the symptoms of hematuria may take. Hematuria may take many forms, and depending upon the where is the lesion and what type of a lesion, it will vary. The microscope gives the most accurate test of the blood in the urine. This specimen viewed by the naked eye is also definitely helpful, but you have to have microscopic confirmation. Urine may be colored red by hemoglobin, although it does not contain any red cells. This is the condition called hemoglobinuria, but it is not a true hematuria. The two conditions can usually be distinguished by the simple inspection. In the former, the urine is absolutely translucent, and in the latter, it is opaque. You might have, if you are habituated to see the urine before sending the urine to the lab, then you will always notice the color of the urine in a patient of basically glomerulonephritis and color of the urine having hemorrhagic cystitis, it is totally different. If there is only a small amount of blood in the urine, the specimen may be smoky appearance or may be normal also. When there is a large amount, the appearance is unmistakable. At the same time, red blood cells may be found in specimens that appear to be absolutely normal. So somebody who is looking at a urine which is clear does not qualify that this patient does not have hematuria. So if you are following some patients, then it is better to do lab confirmation. There is also a definition like initial hematuria, terminal hematuria, and total hematuria. Why it is important? Because it will give you the site of hematuria.
Abba, just one point from the previous slide, just for everyone to understand that when we say red blood cells are found in the specimens of urine on microscope, remember that when you are seeing a child of microscopic hematuria, you send a sample today and you have found RBCs. Tomorrow it will not be there, but 3 days later it will still be there because the urine is clear. So you are not going to pick it up. So it is very likely intermittent. So it's not always there in the specimen. So the absence of RBCs does not mean the microscopic hematuria has gone away. So just a point to be made.
Okay, perfect. So initial, terminal, and total hematuria. It will give you the site of hematuria. Initial hematuria indicates that the blood appears entirely or chiefly in the first portion of the urine void. Terminal hematuria is the presence of the blood in the last portion. And total hematuria, this means whole of a urine is blood stain. It is a habit. Generally, I have got a habit of doing this. When some patient comes in OPD with history of hematuria, I always ask him to void in front of me in a kidney tray. And many a times, those patients who are giving the history of terminal hematuria, literally is beautiful to see. At the end, they just drop one or two, basically they pass 1 or 2 drops of blood. And anybody who has got a total hematuria, you will see whole of a urine is blood stain. So it is good habit to always, case of hematuria coming to you, to ask the patient to void, or at least you see the sample before sending to the lab.
Abha, you are a true nephrologist. You love urine.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. But is it a right thing?
Yes, I mean, I think the differentials which that person has given in the journal don't apply to children. But yes, we hardly see the proximal hematuria or initial hematuria. We see terminal hematuria or mixed
total
hematuria or total hematuria.
Total hematuria. Right, sir. Blood clots in the urine also of a major concern, because some blood collecting in a bladder has got basically whether the blood has come from above, like ureter, pelvis, or kidney, or blood which is blood which has arisen from the bladder, urinary bladder, or maybe from the posterior urethra. Whatever may be the cause of a clot, whatever may be the reason, the clot is there in the urine. It is there in the bladder first. So somebody who is having clot in a bladder has got tremendous difficulties to passing that. Then it gives a lot of colicky pain, and the one who suffers from clot colic, one has to see, because one of my friend was on cyclophosphamide and he had that hematuria and he was passing clots and he was literally crying every time when he used to go for urine. So this is very important. Blood clots in the urine, we hardly see in a pediatric population, but one has to have eye on it.
So just a question, Abha, if clots are so much of a problem, if I cut you on the hand and you bleed profusely, you will form a large clot.
Right.
So why don't you form that in the bladder?
It is formed sometimes.
मोठा clot. Bladder urine pass करता येत नाही, ते urine pass करतो आणि clot बाहेर येतात. Why is it not?
Sometimes there may be urinary retention due to clot which is sitting.
Very rare. Why is it rare?
Achha, you mean to say why there is?
Why does it not clot as much in the bladder?
Don't know.
Urokinase. Urine contains urokinase. It is the same as streptokinase, which is given for your myocardial infarct.
Okay.
So the extraction is from there. That is why it prevents clotting.
Okay.
So urine which is present in the bladder will not allow it to settle down like a stone. Whereas outside, your clot which is formed is hard and firm. Whereas these clots are soft because it's difficult to form a clot in the urine.
But maybe a small, not a major clot as such, but small clot somebody must be passing or it is not there.
No, small clots are there, but
Yeah.
that means the bleeding is profuse. But Yoda profuse bleeding, if you get on the surface, you will form a huge clump, a solid clot. It doesn't happen in the bladder because urine contains urokinase, which basically is like heparin. It doesn't allow the blood to clot.
Point over here is, if you look at the type of a clot, if it is a thin worm-like, then it is arising from a renal pelvis, what has been written in the paper. If it is a thick whip cord-like, then it may be from a ureteric catheter. Or if it is something like from a ruptured kidney or neoplasm, it is a profuse type of a bleeding. Or sometimes, or most of the times, if it is coming from the above, then it is a new growth type of a thing. But when it is a renal colic, the urine may not be that, basically the blood may not be there. It may be a microscopic hematuria because that basically that renal stone obstructs the ureter, and in that phase, generally urine can be free from RBCs. Blood clots originate in the bladder are of no particular shape, but sometimes if they are passed, they have been explained like a tea leaves type of a things can be seen in the system. The clots coming from posterior urethra are usually washed out in the first gush of urine, that we all know. Instrumental laceration of the posterior urethra sometimes followed by the clot retention, because it is exactly at the bladder neck. So if one has to know the site of a hematuria, it has to be either renal, either it is with vesicle, or it has with prostatic. Renal means up, high up end there, vesicle means lower, and prostatic is something which is external. So renal hematuria, how to diagnose that? In this condition, bloody urine can be seen on cystoscopy issuing from one or both ureters. It is most important to know whether it is coming from one side of the kidney or other side of the kidney. If the patient has got symptoms like pain, fullness, or whatever, or colic pain on the one side, then it is very obvious. But when there is a gross painless hematuria, sometimes it finds very difficult to know which kidney is bleeding. In that case, they used to do cystoscopy to find out which kidney is affected. If the bleeding is slight or maybe little, one can only see that the efflux of that whatever is somewhat turbid. But if it is severe, then it is unmistakable, and it resembles a puff of smoke from the stack of a locomotive. Means that is like a puff of smoke which is coming out of that train or something like that. What he has said, personally, I believe that the presence of large blood clots in the urine indicate that the hemorrhage takes place directly into some part of the urinary passage and not into the kidney itself. So if there is a gross hemorrhage which is there, then he says that it may not be from the kidney itself. This is a ureteroscopic picture where he is seeing that the blood is coming from this ureter, as if there is a puff which is going from the locomotive. What will be the hematuria in a nephritic patient? They used to do cystoscopies, but later on they realized that instead of doing cystoscopy, if one understands the symptoms of nephritis like raised blood pressure, there may be some retinal hemorrhages, or there may be edema, or sometimes there may be bad renal parameters, then one can avoid with going ahead with the cystoscopy.
Abba, we are running short of time.
Yeah. That's the reason I'm making it little fast. If it is a neoplastic type, then most of the time, basically, it is the adult paper. So what they have mentioned, the hematuria which is coming, it has to be first, one has to rule out neoplasm, and then only one can go ahead with discussing the other causes, because somebody having hematuria and not done proper investigation in the form of cystoscopy, then he may miss out the lesion which is there up higher, maybe malignancy of the kidney, and he would just that case. The renal hematuria secondary to renal calculus, how it will behave. Bleeding occurs in the evening, that is after his birthday. In such cases, however, a few red blood cells can always be discovered in the morning. Before the introduction of the radiography, this effect of exercise was employed by the French surgeon as a diagnostic stage. Because what they say, the moment you jump or jolt, there is a movement of a calculus and which causes hematuria. If you take a rest, then hematuria decreases. So most of the times they see hematuria more in the night. Or if you want to diagnose it properly, early morning, ask the patient to void the urine, take it, and after exercise, you can repeat the same. As a rule, hematuria is less common in the case of ureteric than renal calculi. Because ureteric, there is a block of a in ureter, it's the block due to calculus.
1-5.
Yeah. This is very important from practice point of view. If somebody has got trauma, subcutaneous trauma in an area of a pelvic region, or maybe in the back, renal hematuria is suspected, maybe in a lumbar region, or maybe higher up. And if you suspect that the patient must be having some sort of a renal injury, so how to go about it? Of course, that patient may or may not have hematuria, but most of the time they will have hematuria, depending upon the type of a lesion. In that case, if the patient's general parameters are normal, if there are no any other intra-abdominal organs involvement, maybe rupture of liver or spleen or whatever, or if the patient is clinically stable, not going in for shock, and if there is only injury to the kidney, with there is little bit perinephritic hematoma, in that situation, one can wait because such type of patients do recover normally. And this is what they have seen observed. Vesical hematuria, most of the times it is due to secondary to neoplasms. A sudden attack of hematuria is always a definite indication for an immediate cystoscopy because it is adult paper. They always think that if the neoplasm is there, instead of finding in the bladder, they always try to look at the kidney. How to differentiate between benign versus malignant? If the patient is only seen in late stages, one obtains the history of repeated attacks of symptomless hematuria with gradually decreasing intervals of between them. Because something which is without symptoms may be neglected. Over a period of time, the patient progresses into a late stage where clinically can be diagnosed as a malignancy, but it is quite a late. So one cannot wait on hematuria. One has to undergo extensive investigations to find out whether it is a benign or malignant. Posterior urethral hemorrhages. Most of the time they are secondary to instrumentation. If they are basically minor, then they are not of any concern. But if the hemorrhages are of extensive, then they may go back into the bladder and they can clot there and they can obstruct or they can cause urinary retention. Anterior urethral hemorrhage, it is very simple because it is due to some sort of injury. Hemorrhage from the anterior urethra is usually accompanied by the continuous flow from the external meatus. It is not an intermittent flow, it is a continuous flow. And if it is retained, then it will be passed with the first gush of urine. And this cannot be called as a true hematuria. Anterior urethral hemorrhages, they are mostly secondary to trauma or something like that. If, however, the bleeding is slight, the blood may collect in the bulb of and only appear in the first portion of the urine pass. This is another example of the initial hematuria. We have seen terminal hematuria, we have seen total hematuria, and this is initial hematuria. So this paper actually of an adult paper, I wanted to have correlation to how previously people used to suspect renal disorders by just looking at hematuria and how to work. But at that time, the systems were not having much of advancement. Like they were not having sonography, they were not having CT scan, they were not having any advanced procedures. So they used to rely more on clinical. So they, even in a bad abdominal trauma, they used to wait till they feel this patient's kidney is badly damaged, and then they go ahead with nephrectomy. So this is how it has evolved and changed. I just wanted to know whether previous their clinical judgment and their treatment outcome and present era where we see lot many investigations and our treatment outcome. So there is a lot of change, but the thought process is not much change. It is more or less same. So this was something, this is a photo of hospital where he was worked, and then it was taken over in this Middlesex Hospital in London. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abba. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing screen.
Yeah, please. We are really running behind time. Thank you so much for the wonderful discussion on hematuria. We'll quickly go to our next speaker, Dr. Parvez Sheikh from Alibaug. And our expert is Dr. Nakul Kothari.
Dr. Pankaj wants to say something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we good?
Let Pankaj put some comments.
So, I mean, just to go back, how much time do I have? 5 minutes, 2 minutes? Just like Dr. Subramaniam asked, I can finish in whatever time is given.
Sir, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. So I think the point is, as Abba rightly mentioned, this was an old paper, and yes, we are all praised for them, but it's slightly outdated because it's a surgeon's perspective to an adult patient presenting with hematuria, and they are relying more on surgical instrumentation. So the diagnosis is based on cystoscopy, doesn't apply to children. The first basic rule is cystoscopy has no role virtually in children presenting with hematuria. there is virtually no role. There are very few instances where you actually need cystoscopy. Unless the ultrasound shows abnormality, you are never going to see anything on on cystoscopy. So if a child presents, in very brief, in a minute, if a child presents to you with hematuria, there are two thought processes that you need to go through. The first is it lower urinary tract or is it kidneys? Because that's the only differentiation that we are interested in. So the lower ones which we are interested in is urine infections, which this person has not alluded to at all. And urine infections have been there for a very long time. But you don't see that commonly in adults. Whereas in children, 20% of them can have hematuria, either microscopic or gross. So urine infections, so the symptoms of urine infection plus the tests. Secondly, a calculus. Now the statement that ureteric calculus does not cause bleeding is slightly misleading, because in fact, you will get symptoms only when the ureter has a calculus passing through it. A stone sitting in the kidney, in the pelvis, will never cause symptoms. You will hardly see anything at all with it. It's the colic that comes is when the stone is passing down the ureter, and very often you will have intermittent episodes of hematuria, because when it hits the side of the ureter, that's where the bleeding occurs. So that's the second cause of the lower UTI. One of the things that I just want to mention is terminal hematuria. The commonest cause, according to textbooks, is schistosomiasis, which we don't see in our population that we see generally. The commonest cause of terminal hematuria in our case is usually an erosion of a blood vessel in the trigone of the bladder. So what happens is that the urine comes out, and at the end, when the detrusor is contracting strongly, the few drops of urine pass out. So it's usually self-limiting unless it is secondary to an infection. So if it is a viral infection, it will go away. If it is a bacterial infection, you give antibiotics and it will settle down anyway. So that erosion, just like your surface cut heals, it will heal away. Now, if these three are not there, and when I say calculus, it means hypercalciuria included in that, then you have to presume that the blood is coming from the kidneys. And then there are 20-25 reasons where the blood comes from the kidneys, which includes IgA, nephritis, MPGN, thin basement membrane, Alport's disease, polycystic, all these kind of illnesses, where the three parameters that you are supposed to look at is the creatinine, the blood pressure of the child, and the proteinuria. So if any of this is abnormal, the child needs extensive investigation. If not, reassure the child, especially if it is microscopic hematuria, and keep the child under follow.
Sir, Pankaj sir.
Thank you. No, sir, we will not take any. We'll have to
Sir,
go to
एक मिनट madam. एकच प्रश्न. Sir, Pankaj sir.
Yeah.
Does the clots in urine rule out the glomerular cause of hematuria?
Not necessarily, because the blood which is coming, you are saying that because you are seeing clots, it may not be from the kidneys. Suppose
may
you
not
do
be from glomerular. I just want to say.
No, so that's what I'm saying. If you do a kidney biopsy, where does the blood come from? It's glomerular, because you have hit there. You can see clots even there because it has stayed in the bladder for a longer time. So clots don't necessarily rule it out, but yes, 95% of the times you can say that it's lower urinary tract.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Next topic is, next speaker is Dr. Parvez Sheikh from Alibag, and expert is Dr. Nakul Kothari. Dr. Parvez.
मॅडम 2 मिनिटं, मला जरा कॉम्प्युटर हँग झालाय, मी जॉईन करतोय.
Okay.
एक क्वेश्चन काहीतरी विचारा तोपर्यंत.
You can introduce the next speaker, expert then.
I've already introduced Chitra. I've already introduced at the beginning. I will say it again. Dr. Mohanty, sir?
No, nothing much. Actually, we should go faster.
Yeah, we should go fast. That's what I'm saying.
Dr. Nakul, will you say something about this topic, which is being presented?
So the article, the journal that we are discussing, or about to discuss, has a very meaningful implication if at all we can have this into routine practice. What I have seen in the places that I have been practicing in corporate setup, there are a lot of hindrances when we do want the family to come in and be involved with the whole care. So there are things like COVID, wherein you would want a COVID test and the mother is not willing to stay there. Often there's a cost factor, because now in a corporate setup, if the mother wants to stay in the hospital, then they have to have an extra charge that they end up spending. So there's a whole different spectrum. But obviously, if at all we can have a public healthcare system where the mothers or the parent can be accommodated in the nursery along with the baby, it would definitely make a whole lot of difference. The babies will go home sooner, there'll be better breastfeeding rates, the compliance will be better, and they understand what is going on with the baby better. So the whole counseling changes, and it's easier for them to comprehend when we say कि baby अभी sick है, baby को support कम हुआ है, the baby is now requiring more support, the apnea, or whatever we speak about, it's very scientific. So once they are there in the unit and they see their baby day in day out, they understand what we are talking about. So definitely it does help.
Dr. Parvez, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Are you
Yes,
ready?
sir. I'm
Yeah,
ready. Sir.
And
So
Dr.
other-
simultaneously, you will about give some comments about the research question, as Dr. Subramanian was pointing out about the journal club. A little bit of the research question, the methodology, or some comments on that you expect. Okay, Dr. Parvez, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And sorry from my side, my computer got hang on the last moment. Is my screen visible to all?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do the full screen.
Yeah, I'll just do the picture. So this topic, actually, Mohinder sir gave me free hand to choose this topic, and this thought came to my mind when I was doing my PG, because we used to have a dedicated NIC unit, and we used to have babies kept in with the mother at the bedside in the general ward. So at our dedicated nursery, we used to have a more sepsis related to our this baby, which were handled by parents, and in NICU the baby were handled by the staff. So at that time, this thought came to my mind, why this is so. So my conclusion was that maybe the staff is handling, so there is a cross contamination, so there is more sepsis. So I was, when Bhandarkar sir told me to look for the topic, I was just searching this topic, whether I can get this some scientific evidence to support my observation. And to my surprise, I found this topic. It is already proven that when we use family, when we make them the use of family in care of newborn babies in NICU, there are many benefits, just more than the sepsis. So I found this paper and found this very interesting, and so I went ahead with this paper. And thank you, Mohanty sir, for allowing me to reuse this paper. And so this is a project, Government of India project, in which they have assessed the implementation of family participatory care in special newborn care units in 3 states of India. It was a pilot project, and they just saw the feasibility of this in our community in government has set up. But we have implication of this project in our private setup also, in personal setup also, and just sir said, Nakul sir said, it is in proper setup also. So if we can utilize this idea, it can have a wide implication in day-to-day practice and better neonatal outcomes. So for introduction, family-centered care is a well-established concept. It's an approach to planning, delivery, and evaluation of services, engaging providers, basically involving patient care, patient relatives, babies relatives in the giving care to newborn babies. Recent Cochrane review supported the positive effect that FCC has on adequacy of children's care, parental satisfaction, and its cost. FCC newborn have been known to reduce duration of hospital stay, improve well-being of preterm babies, improve breastfeeding rates, have better allocation of resources, and increase parent-infant bonding. So the outcome in very low birth weight infant without severe perinatal disease have resulted in better short-term gains like full enteral feeding, early hospital discharge, better neurodevelopmental behavior, performance, and weight gain. It was found that in hospital developmental care led to less morbidities and better clinical outcomes. When it comes to India, the facility-based newborn care has grown rapidly in recent past. We have done tremendous improvement in neonatal care. It is also reported that around 10% of babies treated in special newborn care units do not survive till the age of 1 year. That means after discharge, many babies develop some complications and they are lost. So findings from this observation call for a strategy to ensure continuity of services beyond their hospital stay. So to address this gap, Government of India adopted FCC in Indian context as family participatory care. So they just modified that concept little bit, focusing on babies weighing more than 1,500 grams who do not require oxygen and IV fluids. So to study special newborn care units in terms of family, the objective was to study SNCU in terms of family participatory care. Basically, their readiness to implement this strategy as a quality initiative as per Government of India guidelines in select public health facilities, and to document perspective of doctor and mothers. The specific objective included assessment with regards to providing regular counseling sessions and enabling support to mothers on implementation of FPC and mechanism of reporting within the health system. They also explored the perspective of doctors on the outcome of FPC implementation, such as improvement of breastfeeding and kangaroo mother care. So methods used was, the assessment was conducted between January 2018 to March 2018 across 3 states, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, in public health facilities where FPC was implemented. Districts that had completed the trainings of doctors and nurses were recognized as districts that were implementing FPC. For the purpose of current assessment, 38 of 50 facilities were selected through purposive sampling based on geographical location and duration of implementation of FPC. 8 from Madhya Pradesh, 10 from Odisha, and 20 from Rajasthan. The design was cross-sectional. Settings were SNCU with functional FPC unit in the states, in these 3 states. 38 SNCUs were included, doctor and nurses in charge of unit, and 2 eligible mothers per unit. 1 inside step-down unit and 2nd outside the step-down unit. Those whose newborn were admitted to SNC unit having stable baby weight more than 1,500 grams. Data were collected by 1 assessor in each of SNCU who had prior knowledge about health system and were specifically trained in conducting field level assessment. They were trained by research team before collection of data. Data comprised of 3 components based on observation and interviews on the day of visits. The first point was facility assessment. This was done mainly on the basis of observation as per the predefined checklist and record reviews supplemented by interviews. Parameters included whether mothers received enabling support from nurses on FPC through observations, assessed on the basis of availability of supplies, chairs for family members in step-down units, availability of training space and audiovisual equipment, each having score of 1. The regular training sessions held for families on FPC through observations and interview with families always was given score of 4, occasionally missed 3, sometimes held 2, occasionally held with audiovisual aids 1, never 0. Mothers and family members assisted by nurses for breastfeeding and kangaroo mother care, again it was given score from 0 to 4. FPC information recorded regularly through review of SNCU and FPC record. This was done basically to assess the record keeping and reporting. Then second was the health worker perspective. What is the health worker perspective about this program? So doctor and nurses in charge of unit were interviewed to assess their perspective about the possible outcomes of FPC, like breastfeeding rest, quality of care, KMC, hospital-acquired infections. Their view on improvement FPC were sought. These were elicited by administering a semi-structured tool designed for this assessment. Then third point was maternal practices. The mothers were asked about their practices with regards to breastfeeding, KMC and training received after the babies were admitted to SNCU. Any problem faced by mothers with regards to FPC were explored. A semi-structured tool was used for this purpose. The perspective of doctors and nurses and practices mother were expressed as proportions. The challenges of implementing FPC and ways to overcome them were also noted. Then the results were out of 38 SNCUs, we found that FPC session for mother were happening in 36, that is 95% of facilities. SNCU provided enabling support to mothers on 74% times, had regular sessions for the families almost 70%. Nurses assisted mothers and family members for breastfeeding and kangaroo mother care 76%. And FPC information were recorded in almost 70% of the time. So this is the same results in a tabular form. Then who was the beneficiary on family participatory care implemented? The average gestation of the age of the babies were 34 weeks. The respondents allowed to participate in care of child inside this were almost 70%. Stay with the baby inside NSCU was 3.4%. Respondent who received any FPC session was 73%. Mother practicing exclusive breastfeeding or exclusively give breastfeeding was 70%. Mothers who knew that exclusive breastfeeding should be done for 6 months were 67%. And respondents who practiced KMC for babies less than 2 kg were 55. So duration of KMC, average duration was 1.6. Respondents who felt mothers should be allowed to enter SNCU were 74%. So positive observations were, majority of the respondents expressed that the quality of care had improved since the time of implementation of FPC. All of them concurred that breastfeeding and KMC practices had improved with its implementation. Follow-up rates of newborn after discharge from SNC was also improved. Majority of respondents expressed that quality of staff expressed that it was difficulties observed were staff expressed that it was difficult to maintain supplies and logistics. That is a usual scenario. With multiple people entering the unit for various tasks such as KMC and institutional follow-up, the FPC session got affected. The internal partitions were not enough to prevent distractions. So the limitation of the study was the perspective of implementing team were explored that might have introduced some amount of subjectivity since they were not correlated from available records. Separate interviews with nurses could have yielded more information. In the absence of any comparator, it was not possible to evaluate the impact of FPC because the previous records were not available. So conclusion, what is already known, family participatory care is effective for improving care of newborn admitted to SNC units. It improves breastfeeding and reduces duration of stay in hospital and maternal anxiety. What this study adds, it is feasible to implement FPC as a special newborn care unit quality improvement initiative in health system settings. FPC is easy to initiate, but needs strong health system support for optimal results. So, thank you.
Dr. Nakul, would you like to add something to this?
Just talking about this journal and the statistics, how they have done, how they have structured the study. I think there's a lot of things left for just very objective outcomes. That is, the interviewers have been asking, and then it is just how they feel the breastfeeding rate might have increased or how the care has increased. Having a pilot study or having a baseline rate of the local unit or the local data and comparing it after the intervention would have definitely helped and would have given us very clear answers as to how much, and then you can talk about, is it really helping? Because when you say that, we all know that once the mother is there in the unit and she will feel better about the baby, she will meet the baby, and the breastfeeding would definitely make sense that it breastfeeding compliance and rate will increase. But just to put it more statistically down there, you need some more numbers. But otherwise, definitely this is this is the way forward, and we have to have this study included only the late preterms. I think the stable babies, 34 weekers, 1.5 kilos. Once this is well established in our unit or in the healthcare system, we should then encourage people to do it for more preterm babies, more sicker babies. There's no reason why a mother should not be involved, even if it matters just to come in and change a nappy. She'll feel good to do that. She doesn't need to be able to breastfeed to enter the unit. She can just come in, stroke the baby. She can change the nappy. All these things do make a lot of difference.
Okay. Thank you so much for that.
I just want to make one point, if you allow me. I just want to make, Dr. Nakul and Dr. Parvez.
Yes, sir.
Is the result or whatever better survival outcomes and all those things, is it because of lesser nursing handling? Because this is conducted in a government setup where there are 40-30 babies being managed by maybe 3 or 4 nurses. So can we extrapolate this result to a center like SRCC, Dr. Nakul is there, where there may be 4 babies with 4 nurses, where one nurse may be looking after 1 or 2 babies. So obviously the contamination chances are less, cross-handling is less, and the same outcome. In case of government, there are 40 babies being managed by 3 or 4 nurses. Obviously cross-contamination and where the babies are coming from, that's another big problem. Origin from the obstetric side. So can this government setup intervention be extrapolated to a specialty centers where there is adequate nursing manpower already being there and where you can get this kind of report? That's one. And second, if you give these services, obviously this will be implemented in the setup where obstetric and neonatal units are close by. So center like SRCC or maybe ours, where the obstetric unit is at one place and the neonate is at another place. How this can be really brought about? So those are 2 things.
So
I just wanted
to begin
to,
with, yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to know what is novelty about this study. And let me just take some criticism. What this study adds? Nothing. See, intervention of family members is a known fact. What is that the researchers wanted to tell? Is there any, is it the cross-sectional demographic data they want to present, or they have compared with family members, without family members? And what is the assumption that one member will not infect and 3 members will infect? One member doesn't wash hands, all 3 will wash hands. My point is, there is no novelty in this study, because this is emotional blackmail. See, you tell that the mother should be there with the baby. I have done a study, and at the end of the study, I concluded that the mother should be with the baby. This is nothing novel. What I meant was, I have done the study where the mothers were there, and I did from 20 centers. And no, Nakul sir, I'm sorry, but what I meant was the journal club can be criticized in this style. You know, take
Definitely.
the papers and make it very objective, criticize them and take them to the core. See, if you see the objective, if the slides can be projected again, I'll show you, to study the practices in the newborn. See, whenever an objective in any journal, starts with to study, what else they do apart from studying? No, it should be to compare, to assess. The words should not be to study. To study means they will tell there were 4 males, 5 females, 10 with less than 1,500. They'll present the data. See, the data is very, very misleading. You can fill the pages, but there has to be some kind of a solid objective with which done. So let me know from the presenters, both of you, what is the novel thing that, I mean, novelty which you wanted to
Sir, I
drive home?
included this study. Basically, I wanted to stress on the less nosocomial infection rate in the both the groups. And I found another study, but it was little older. So I didn't include that paper. I included this paper because this was the recent one.
No, did the study establish that fact?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But what are the limitations of the study?
Which study, sir?
In the same study, you have mentioned lastly limitations.
In this study, sir, this study has only seen the feasibility of FPC in a government setup. Their aim was not to compare, or they only seen the feasibility of the FPC in government setup, whether it can be done or not. It was just a pilot study.
Correct. And did they compare with anything else?
No, they haven't compared because they didn't have the pre-record, like before intervention record. They were not.
They need not compare with the pre-record. They can take 3 places where it is done. What out of 36, 2 were not included. Out of 38 SNCUs, 2 were not there. Correct.
Yeah.
What was the reason for those 2 dropouts? That's most important.
So that they have not mentioned, sir.
Yes. See, that shows the non-transparency of a study. That means a study should tell the 2 SNCUs were not included because in their unit, this was not a practice.
Yeah.
Or these were, why they were out of the study. So why it was not a study with only 34 and 36 you say and 2 were out. The 2 out will give me a lot of suspicion. Are you getting my point? See, I'm not criticizing this journal or the concept, but I'm coming to the point as to how one should read a journal.
Technically speaking, what you said is something called as intention to treat analysis, wherein if you start with 40 units and at the end, if you land up dropping 2, 3, 4 units, then the reliability of this study is drastically lost. This is called as intention to treat the analysis. You start with a number and you end with a number. That is supposed, for whatever reason, then that becomes supposed to be a very qualitative study. When you drop few units or few kind of initial subsets at the end of it, then that becomes like these were the unit not complying or they were showing decreasing the end product, so they were deleted. That's kind of suspectistic.
No, but the point is not, see, they can delete 4 also. They should mention the reason in the journal.
Exactly.
What was the reason for deletion? See, that is called transparency. See, what I'm coming to the point, Mohit, it's let them delete 4 also. The question is, how is that the authors have put efforts to avoid the bias, and therefore the message that comes out of a study can be extrapolated for our practice. See, more the bias, that means they start with an intention, they end with it, they're successful in driving home the intention. See, I would love the studies, those who start with something and then they say we were unsuccessful. In fact, they may be more transparent. I'm just telling you, you can see now onwards, you see lots of studies. You will see them even in our reputed journals. They may or may not mean anything. and they are just junk that are dumped. So this will be like any of our postgraduate thesis. No, they just complete for the sake of it. But here I'm not criticizing the journal, please. I'm trying to tell you how we can conduct ourselves in the journal club. See, please don't take this as that those authors should not bang or bash on me, please, for heaven's sake, and nor the editors. So maybe when you are discussing, you please take up the how one should actually take the messages from a journal. It should never be emotional. It should be by evidences.
Thank you, sir. That was a wonderful critical analysis by you, and as rightly pointed out.
Yes? One second. That
Yes,
is
sir.
why this studies which was suggested by Dr. Parvez, he suggested 7 papers. Out of these 2 were shortlisted and he was given. These papers had shortcomings. Actually, we wanted the shortcomings should come to the fore. Also the positive and the negative. Like you see, the control group was not there. You could very much argued that because the interventions are beneficial, known benefits, so on ethical grounds we could not exclude some of them. You can say that, but this has to be brought out in the discussion. It is not the case presentation or just a review article. If a paper is being presented, starting from your research question, why it was done, what are the objectives, and what are the controls have taken and what parameters and statistical methods employed, how those statistical methods are actually applicable or not, and then the message. In this form, we should discuss in the journal club. Journal club is not talking just about a paper. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now we will go ahead to Dr. Gangulia, sir, who will present snatches from the journals. Over to sir.
Thank you, madam. I will just share the screen, and by the time the screen comes,
but not more than 3
so
minutes
maybe
each.
T20
style, each. You have got 4. Yeah.
I was the part of one of the T20 session. If doctors, yes. if I'm allowed to talk, to call our chief guest as a Dr. Subbu sir. As doctors, our chief guest said, I will restrict to lesser time and probably will finish in few minutes only. And जैसा अभी this heading I have given clipping 1, but let us keep it as Mudde Ki Baat in the next journal club. So it should be the all Mudde Ki Baat and nothing else. So I will be presenting 4 clippings from the journals. This is safety and immunogenicity of 2 formulation of rotavirus vaccine in Vietnamese infants. And this is taken from the gist is the details of it was when it was accepted and what was available online. So it was the aim was the just comparison of the safety and immunogenicity of 2 formulation. One was the frozen one and one was the liquid candidate vaccine. And both were the live attenuated ones. It was methodology is very important. It was done on the age 60 to 91 days infants. It is a partially double-blinded active control studies. The important part is that, just give me 1 minute. Just it includes non-inferiority criteria. I will not go in the details. This is a statistics thing of the confidence intervals and geometric mean concentration. We will not go in the detail, but the point is, these are the study and the results were there. So there was no cases of interception or death reported in this study, and almost both of the both vaccines showed the same results. Therefore, conclusion was Rotavine, that is liquid vaccine, is immunogenicity as good as and similar safety profile as compared to the frozen one. So what was the recommendation implication? Why this study was done? Probably in this country, Vietnam, this was the frozen was the licensed one. This was the liquid candidate vaccine. So Rotavine can be considered as a more suitable option for programmatic use to prevent diarrhea in Vietnam and Mekong region. Maybe the easier of the administration, easy to use it that way. Now, probably this study will help in our Indian context is as far as Indian context goes. We have this formulation available One is the frozen, which was the rotaries, and the liquid one, all these four are there. So this study cannot be extrapolated to Indian scenario unless and until studies are available in Indian level. So probably we should have some studies in this regard. And one more thing.
Hemant, only 30 seconds comment from me.
Yeah.
Whenever we read such articles about the vaccines, please read one column called as conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
And is it funded by pharma or is it not funded by pharma? If it is funded by pharma, forget it. The conclusions are same as objectives. Go ahead.
No. So yeah, I absolutely right. And so there was no conflict of interest in this page, in this paper. This is the second clipping, which is detection and identification of enterovirus circulating in children with acute gastroenteritis in Parastate. It is from Brazil. So this again, there's a details of the. It is a commentary, not a paper, but it's a commentary taken from the virology journal. And then this was the comment which came from one of the Brazil pediatrician, that detection and identification of enterovirus circulating in children with acute gastroenteritis should be taken with precaution. It should not be. The background of this studies paper was there. In the enterovirus virus is very common. High percentage are asymptomatic, and they are not recognized medically important one, but still causing acute gastroenteritis. So number of surveillance studies has been postulated diarrhea potential of certain enterovirus. But this author of this paper agrees with the comment which was given, detection of EV strains, enterovirus strains must be interpreted cautiously. The point is this study was done to just improve the knowledge on the genetic diversity, rather assessing the causative relationship between EVs and ages. But definitely studies have reported there is a concurrence of enterovirus in the context of acute gastroenteritis, rather establishing enterovirus as two diarrhogenic pathogens. But then again, one more thing was suggested. Probably the neutralizing antibody titer will be much more helpful, because serological diagnosis is much more relevant than the epidemiological investigation. So the point is that probably correlation between non-polio enterovirus and acute gastroenteritis is complex. Probably you have to refine methods of detecting the ongoing and recent infection patient with acute gastroenteritis, and probably it requires continuous monitoring of enterovirus in cases of AGE. Why? Because it is said there's a potential which may give rise to the recombination event, which may give rise to some novel evolutionary lineages of enterovirus. Still establish the correlation between that. So probably they have taken as a potential strategy towards strengthening the surveillance for non-polio enterovirus system in Brazil. That finishes the second one.
What are the messages? You must keep on giving us messages to the practicing pediatricians.
So in this second one, probably the acute gastroenteritis, we see most of what viruses we see. There may be having, after the episode gets over, still there may be enterovirus circulating in the body, but they do not give rise to the disease. They may be harboring it, but they don't give rise to disease. That is one thing. This is a short acute bronchiolitis during COVID-19 pandemic, and it has been taken from this journal, and details of this has been given below. The autumn and winter bronchiolitis epidemics have virtually disappeared in the first year of COVID-19 pandemic. So the study was done, and the study was done to see what are the bronchiolitis cases appearing in the fourth quarter of 2020, and what is the role of the SARS-CoV virus. So then this was the methodology, which was this prospective multi-center trial was done at Spain between October and December 2020, and clinical data was collected, multiplex PCR for respiratory viruses were performed. And this is in detail, but I will not go in the details of this. But what is the interesting point is this 28 corresponded to rhinovirus and only 4 to SARS, and 1 had both type of infection. So, and as well, SARS bronchiolitis were comparable to RV bronchiolitis, except for hospital stay. And one more thing, the conclusion was that SARS rarely causes acute bronchiolitis, and it is not associated with a severe clinical course. And also there was a marked decrease of bronchiolitis cases. The reason for that is not seen, but probably the second paper which I'm going to, the fourth and last one, which I'm going to say is that, and of course in India also we saw that in last year also we said, ye saal season nahi aaya, because there was very less of bronchiolitis and then nothing was there. And what came there, it is so SARS was not related to the bronchiolitis. The last paper which was this clipping is there. Bronchiolitis COVID-19 was a nearly absent disease. Why it got absent? So this study was done, and probably this is taken from the European Journal of Pediatrics and received and accepted on 26 January 2019. Stay-at-home orders, physical distancing, face masks, and other. And non-pharmacological intervention do not only impact COVID-19, but also probably the dynamics of various other infection diseases. And of course, everybody knows it is a bronchiolitis, a viral infection, seasonal wave. And but this year, 92.5, it is not common, 92.5% less was observed, and of 99% reduction in number of registered in cases in the Belgium. To say that conclusion was that the 2020 winter bronchiolitis peak is probably non-existent at that point of time, but probably it may be rise in peak when most of these non-pharmacological interventions and will be relaxed and pre-pandemic life restarts. What is known? We know that bronchiolitis causes a yearly seasonal wave of admission in pediatric departments, but non-pharmaceutical interventions do not only impact 19, but also the dynamics of various other infectious diseases. So what is new? Whenever these things are followed, there is this peak doesn't exist, and a delayed spring can occur if the pandemic life restarts. Point is that probably does pharmaceutical interventions can be implemented to decrease the other infectious disease, though we say ye saal season nahi tha, aaya tha. So though probably this intervention can be used to decrease the incidence of infectious disease, probably that we can learn from this study, and probably that was the reason of the decreased cases of the bronchiolitis in the COVID pandemic. And as Dr. Subbu sir is chairman of respiratory chapter, he may comment on that. Yes.
Hemant, एक फक्त मला सांगायचं आहे. Hello, Hemant.
Yes.
Hello.
But
observing the same norms, same social distancing and mask also, now we are getting too much cases of bronchiolitis. What is the reason behind it then?
Now that Dr. Subbu sir will explain.
Okay, I will explain you. There is a statistical myth behind the study. One, regarding mask, distancing, social observation, lockup, everything does not affect the age group of bronchiolitis. It's a disease below 2 years, with or without lockdown, all of them will stay at home and with the mother. Please understand this point. Maybe some mothers are able to breastfeed better because they are also locked down. So this could be in a lighter way. But the point which I wanted to tell you is, if there is an infection of an older sibling, he would have brought from nursery or school and then spread to the child. Maybe that would have been a matter of, what should I say, cross infection, which must have come down. But what I feel the bias in this particular study is the mild bronchiolitis, they might not have reported. They must have just taken paracetamol drops, normal cell nasal drops, gone through the net, read themselves and got self-treated. Don't you agree? Okay, if only bronchiolitis would not have come out, I would have agreed. No other illness have come. Dengue has not come all these days. After lockdown is opened, all the cases of dengue are rising up. Where were these dengue all these days? So there is some kind of bias. What I meant was, even with disease, many must have been locked down in the house rather than coming to the doctor, and many self-limiting diseases which were reported to the clinician have been self-limited in the family itself without the help of any doctors. So this is some kind of observation, but I could be even wrong. Don't think that when I tell something, it will be correct. If I have to tell something, again I have to do a study and tell, but I don't have a study.
Sir, can I say something? Please, here? What you have said and what Wankhede sir asked me, exactly same point I got it. Because probably the last year there was strict lockdown. People were not coming afraid of phobia of the COVID. So they were not coming to doctor. They were taking treatment at home only by looking at the old papers, may say whatever may be there. And as we say, viral infection they decline after 4 or 5 days and it goes. Now what happening? Now there is no phobia as such. the people are roaming here and there, and thoda bhi 103, 104 बुखार आया तो तुरंत उन लोग hospital. Therefore, there is extremely overcrowding. For last 15 days, almost we are having 80 to 100 patients per day. So probably the fear has gone. And
schools are closed. Schools are closed. It is not open. Schools are closed actually.
No, but schools are closed. But people, children are intermingling and they're playing, and their strict lockdown rules are not followed. I think so. That was the reason.
Moite sir, add kara. Moite sir.
See, I have a clear point here that what you are describing can happen to those mild cases where they will be staying at home. But if you ask me from your perspective, the number of hospitalization this time for bronchiolitis, they are at least 10 times higher than last year.
Yes.
Right.
10 times higher than 5. I have already ventilated 4 children in last 2 weeks. Just now, 2 on ventilator. This I have not seen in last 10 years. And these children, had they been there last year, I don't think they would have stayed home. They would come in that condition also. So I firmly believe this year. And secondly, there is a universal higher reporting of RSV or related bronchiolitis, may it be from North America, may it be from Australia, from every part of the world. There is a very high incidence of bronchiolitis this year. So there is something related. I don't know whether
the reason, sir. The reason for
let me explain the reason from whatever I could
one of the things is the dominance of one virus perhaps subsides the others. What that kind of phenomenon has been put forward. Whether that was last year COVID dominant, this year the other viruses, since the COVID is on the back foot.
Survival of the fittest.
The fact is that the observations are correct. That let us take it, all of us.
Right.
But the explanations can vary from one to one. Nobody is correct in giving the correct explanation, because until and unless this wave gets completed, we cannot draw any conclusions. Till then, we should keep our mind open.
Sir, one thing
we can give probable explanations which look scientific, but many a times, Bhandarkar sir, it so happens that logical explanations also fail in reality when we actually see the studies. So therefore, all of us can give some rational, appealing, apparently looking scientific, logical explanations, but whether they are truth or not, we will only know with time.
Sir, that is correct. But what I can say is every year there is a viral infections or season is there. But as a predilection of the virus for upper respiratory, lower respiratory, right? 7-8 years back, when I brought my Fortuner, there's a lower respiratory infection was more. So I got a lot of admission. This time, same thing is happening. Almost every third, fourth patient, that way below 1 year, that way below 6 months, even the neonates, they are getting the infection of bronchiolitis and they are getting admitted.
Yeah, I can tell you one thing. One thing is that many of the viruses are known for cyclical trends, just like mangoes come in alternate years. They don't even come every
I want to
year.
say whether that virus is limited to upper respiratory or lower respiratory. Suppose this virus has a more predilection to go for a lower respiratory, they are going to present the bronchiolitis alert. Not the abalaba nahi asं वाटतं मला असं.
Dr. Gastroenteritis is also on rise. Gastroenteritis is also on rise.
बरोबर. लोअर रेस्पिरेटरी जास्त, जेव्हा व्हायरस लोअर रेस्पिरेटरी बसतो तेव्हाच ऍडमिशन्स वाढतात. अप्पर रेस्पिरेटरी एवढे ऍडमिशन होत नाहीत आपल्याला.
Dr. Subbu sir, is it same at Bangalore? Is it same as Bangalore?
No, at least in my institutes, there is no increase or surge in the cases right now.
Okay.
But the bitter truth is, I agree that they are not coming for mild illnesses. They are coming for immunizations, which are left out. And second thing is they are coming with really sick children. So that means our ICUs are full, OPDs are less, and immunizations are full.
Right.
I think this is a tertiary care institution, so therefore I don't comment, because that's what happens. See, they don't like to come to hospital because there is a fear of COVID. They don't want to see our faces.
Right.
Our IB president is getting very restless, right? Late झाला already 25 minutes. त्यामुळे ते जरा रेसलेस होतात. व्होट ऑफ थँक्स जावं लागेल डायरेक्ट.
नाही वेट मोंटी सर
एक
Yes, sir.
तसं सर काय म्हणायचंय?
हा
सर,
आता काय हल्ली काय झालंय, माझ्या मुलात पोटातला आलेला आहे, म्हणजेच ब्रॉन्किओलायटिस झालेला आहे. तो कधी घरी थांबत नाही, तो हॉस्पिटल घालतो आहे.
राईट,
असं आहे. पोटातला आलेला आहे.
Dr. Mohanty sir.
मोहिते सर, डू यू अग्री विथ मी?
हो होय ते तर नेहमीच आहे.
हा, पोटातलं आलेलं आहे ते थांबत नाही एकदम हॉस्पिटलमध्ये.
चालेल चलो.
Mohanty sir, your concluding remarks, sir. Sir, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. I think it's time. I wanted to ask one question out of this topic. Dr. Subramaniam, do you really think that tuberculosis has also come down during this period, one year, last
I
1
will
year?
tell you whether the disease has come down or not is a mystery, but the reporting has come down is a fact. That's I think that's the best way to answer this, because tuberculosis lies in the lungs for months together, hidden, and suddenly it can come out. So progression of the disease, see, let's say I miss out a stage of tuberculosis and it presents after the lockdown, I don't know. So epidemiological studies, it is difficult to answer from any expert, because they give their very, very subjective impressions, which have, I used to, Mohanty sir, I used to be very enthusiastic in the beginning, used to make a comment. Now I am responsible, I can't comment. See, please understand my problem, because I will be answering as president of the respiratory chapter.
No, we are here to cover.
And you know, it is very difficult. Bhandarkar, it was very easy to give talks when I was very young. You know, now it is very, very difficult, because any line would be taken with some messages. So I should be cautious. Let me tell you, the fact is that I don't know.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But still, so you are young. इसलिए तो हम young है. President post लेते नहीं है.
What I meant was young in the sense, that as youngsters we can argue. It's fine, fair enough.
Right.
But when we give the messages, no, I should be at least knowing the facts and then only speak. Otherwise, I can always tell, no, you will find out the facts.
Very right.
Or I'll come back and let you know what I will again search what happened to the tuberculosis.
सर एक सेशन हाउ टू प्रेजेंट द आर्टिकल आप ऑर्गेनाइजर को पहले दे दो, बाद में हम सबको बुलाएंगे.
नहीं, what I felt was like, madam, give me only 30 seconds of time. It is excellent initiative. What I am asking you is standardize this.
नहीं सर बराबर है ये इनिशिएटिव.
My point is standardize this.
पहले जो वनडे प्राइमरी मैच जो होते हैं
I will try to
मारामारी है, तो इसलिए आज आपको बुलाया है.
Jay, 1st September, Dr. Subbu sir is going to talk for first 30 minutes how to present the.
Right.
No, let it be there. See, even I may not be ideal. Please understand. Even if you want Piyush Gupta, you can get Thangavelu. No problem. But my question is not that. Let us see. We all think that we are 60 years. Journal is not required for us. Research is not. This should go from every practitioner's mind. See, everybody should feel young. They should go back like postgraduate research student and should fight on a platform. And at least to me, it's a love to see academicians arguing, and never ever take it to egos. It is never issue. It should be issue based and never personalized. Then it will be a fantastic platform. Create that platform, and you people are excellent in that. And I will appreciate you, congratulate you. This is the best thing that you have done, rather than calling somebody for an expert talk. Right. And I will compliment you and telling you that Raigad has stood for it, and every branch should follow it.
Thank
and
you so much.
Really, I'm very happy.
Thank you so much, sir. Okay, now we'll go to vote of thanks to
Madam, Dr. Chitrana काय बोलायचंय?
Sir, we have to wind up, sir.
I will put in the group. I will put my
Okay,
suggestion.
Chitra, you want?
No, right now it is not possible. I will put it in the group.
2 minutes.
Votes of thanks ला जाऊ दे, बरं पडेल. चला.
Vote of thanks directly.
Yeah.
Neha.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. On behalf of IIP Raigad, I would thank our respected chief guest, Dr. N.K. Subramania, sir. You are an excellent teacher. You simplify any topic so nicely and so understandable. Your way of teaching is always awesome. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation to join today. Also promising us to give a short lesson on how to read a journal effectively. Thank you, sir. Then I would like to thank our esteemed experts, Dr. Pankaj Deshpande, sir, and Dr. Nakul Kothari, sir, for giving their expert scientific opinions. Would thank our speakers of today's journal journey, Dr. Abhasa Patankar, sir, and Dr. Parvez Sheikh, sir. Thank you both of you, sir, for choosing and presenting such amazing cases. Both the cases were quite interesting. Thank you.
Hemant.
Thank you, Dr. Hemant Gangolia, sir, for your tips and bits from journal. They were quite amazing. I would like to thank Dr. Neeman Mohanty, sir, for taking the responsibility of our journal journey. Thank you, sir, for being so supportive. Also, I would like to thank Dr. Dhananjay Shah, sir, from IIP Gujarat, and Dr. Sampath Sasane, sir, from Maharashtra IIP, for taking out their valuable time and joining us today. Then I would also thank our president, Dr. Sunita Ingle, ma'am, for organizing this academic meet. Also, thank you, ma'am, for encouraging and giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much, ma'am. So I would like to thank our branch secretary, Dr. Nilima Bhandarkar, ma'am, for being always there. I would like to thank the pillars of our branch, Dr. Mahesh Mohite, sir, Dr. Chitra Kulkarni, ma'am, Dr. Pramod Wankade, sir, Dr. Sunil Sheth, Dr. Mahesh Sambhare, sir. Thank you all for being so active and supportive in each activity of our branch. I would like to thank Dr. Jay Bhandarkar, sir, for moderating today's academic event. Thank you, sir.